as a member of the Pan-African Parliament. So a day like this, what is the Parliament saying? How does it, design the day to be commemorated across the continent?
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, what is happening in the world today is preventing us from doing precisely that in South Africa. I would have been there by now if this lockdown because of coronavirus is not taking place. But in normal circumstances, we celebrate the 25th of May because it was on that day that the OAU was founded, and that was in 1963. And coincidentally, I was in Ghana at the time when OAU was founded. I was in high school. I was in Form 2 at the time. And I could remember exactly what happened in the newspapers that day in Ghana when they were publishing Nkrumah's address to that monumental occasion. His address was entitled, "The Day the Earth Stood Still." That was the title of his speech. Essentially, what we celebrate is, in the first place, the efforts that have been made to bring the continent together into OAU, which has now metamorphosed into AU. The achievements and the challenges, which are monumental still, because 1963 to date is a long time, and I wouldn't say we have not achieved anything. We have achieved a lot, but there is a lot more to be achieved. Because at least we have achieved the fundamental objective, that is a collective understanding of the need for Africa to be together in order to become stronger. That is achieved. And the collective understanding of the need for Africa to have a representative continental institution, which is the Pan-African Parliament, that also is achieved. Even though Pan-African Parliament is not yet a parliament in the real sense of the term, because we are not still legislative, but we are in the process. And we have also, at least have Africa Court of Justice, which is one of the organs, and we have also some of the most important things are still yet to be achieved, because we don't still have a central bank of Africa.
It is evolving.
Yes, it is. Well, we are moving towards it with great difficulties, but eventually we'll be there. But it took Europe 54 years to be where they are now in the European Union. So we might take a shorter time because of the experiences that we have been learning from others.
These are very important historical aspects, especially when you talk about the formation itself, and remembering some of the speeches when you were back days in schools. And now we know the African Union is governed by organs, 9 organs, and this is as a result of the Article 5 of the Constitutive Act of the African Union. Now, will we reflect back as to what must have brought these African minds together in the first place to think for a common front?
Well, we must go back to history, because the whole process of movement towards continental unity started in the 60s, I would say, when Africa, though many countries were independent, was still fragmented, because you have different organizations, regional organizations. You have OCAM in the Francophone zone, and then you have Casablanca bloc, and you have a Morovia bloc. Nkrumah and others were in the Casablanca bloc. We were at the forefront of the fight for continental unity. And I think each time we celebrate, we must give them credit, because Nkrumah spent all his life fighting for the unity of the African continent, because he saw that unless Africa is united, we would still be having monumental problems of development and defense of the continent. You've seen all the crises that have been taking place in different countries. And what he had suggested, if that had taken place, for example, a continental army, We would have been able to deal with the crisis in the Congo, would have been able to deal with the crisis in Rwanda, we would have been able to deal with the crisis in Burundi, in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, and of course, Libya, which is now has become almost ungovernable because of what had happened there. So these are some of the important things that Nkrumah advocated and worked for. But unfortunately, they were not active in his lifetime. We are still moving towards them, but these are absolute necessities for the country to be able to defend itself and to defend its integrity and independence.
About the issue of what could have been done to make it more realistic that Africa is indeed united. So are the chance still there that, you know, Africa, looking at the trend from historical perspective, where are we, do we, you know, want to know now?
I think there are big chances, and I think we are moving, even though with difficulties, which is not bad, because the more difficulties and more challenges you have, the more determined you become, and the more you use your mental and intellectual resources to overcome those difficulties. I think we are moving forward, since there is a continental institution called the PanAfrican Parliament, which is supposed to represent the peoples of the African continent. Members of PanAfrican Parliament are not necessarily representing their countries in Parliament. They are representing the African people, because when we take oath, we took oath to defend and serve the people of Africa, not giving countries. You know, AU is composed of about 53 countries. So that is a big achievement. But the difficulties still remain that there can never be unity without the willingness, political willingness of these countries to sacrifice national sovereignty for continental sovereignty. Even if it is going to be partial, it is absolutely necessary that that sacrifice is undertaken in order for us to come together to be able to do things in a collective way. And that is a big thing that still we have to fight, because even at the level of the Pan-African Parliament, even though we all know that we are representing collectively the African people, each time you begin to talk about problems in a particular country, you know that you are getting on the toes of those people who are coming from that country. So the feeling is still lacking to see the continent as our entity, our geopolitical entity to which we all belong, to which we must all defend. People are still clinging to their national entities, even though we collectively are representing the whole continent. It is sometimes almost taboo for some people to talk about other countries. As far as I'm concerned, nobody stopped me from talking, because I know what I know. I'm there for the African continent, not for Gambia as a country. So these are some of the problems that we are still to have. We still have to fight at the level of, in fact, Pan-African Parliament should be a model for unity, because it is 53 countries, 5 times 53. Each country is sending 5 delegates. 5 times 53 is about 700 something MPs. So together, I think we can do a lot of things. And that is why at the level of the Parliament, we have committees, about 10 committees, committees for each sector. For example, the agricultural sector, the education sector, the ICT sector, the foreign affairs sector, the economic sector, the finance sector, and all those things are there. And the objective is each of these committees are working to see how best we can harmonize, for example, education. I'm a member of the education committee. How we can harmonize the curricula at the level of the continent. That is not an easy task, but it can be done. Because, for example, if you take history, it's not difficult for us to harmonize the history being taught in the Gambia with the history in Senegal, history in every other country in the continent. The same goes for geography, the same goes for economics, the same goes for all the other subjects that we are teaching in our schools. this is something that we are working on. Each committee is working on.
You touch a very important point, that is the issue of sensitivity attached to one talking over another country. So in terms of administration of Africa Union affairs, who is there now? Is it would we say the Committee of Head of State, or during summits that the confidence is given to the Parliament? Because the Parliament is there to enforce the application of policies in the interest of the continent. So where would the Parliament, Pan-African Parliament, rely on to get the confidence to start speaking up and start feeling like they are Africans rather than national from other nationals?
Well, currently the supreme organ of the Union is the Assembly of Heads of State and Government. Pan-African Parliament is still not a parliament in the real sense of the term, because it is not legislative. We are playing an advisory role to the Assembly. And we make recommendations to the Assembly, and they are not bound to take our recommendations. For example, in the domain of education, whatever recommendations we make there are recommendations that they are to look at the level of the Assembly, and then eventually at the level of the different regions. You know, the regional blocks like the ECOWAS, the CEMAC, and SADC, and the East Africa Legislative Assembly. By the way, that's the only legislative assembly of all these regional parliaments. East Africa is a legislative one, and people are elected directly to that assembly, and they are members of that as a legislator, not members of their parliament first and then that. That is just a temporary measure. They have gone beyond that, and everybody is moving towards that. But we still have a lot of difficulties to overcome, because there is a need maybe to harmonize our electoral laws. There is a need to determine how this is going to be conducted, how it is going to be done. These are all big problems that we have to look at the level of the Pan-African Parliament and at the level of the Assembly of Heads of State.
Yeah, so, and then this is one of the Afro-pessimist view that they will say regional blocks are being prioritized by their member states than the AU itself, which is for the entire continent. Does this have a place to, slow down the process?
No, they are not. They are not. The regional blocks, the regional parliament, in fact, are the building blocks of the continental parliament. The continental parliament is working hand in glove with all the regional assemblies. For example, an education committee in Pan-African Parliament works closely with education committee in all the regional parliaments, because in the final analysis, the objective is finally to harmonize curricula at the level of the, so that we are teaching exactly the same stuff to our children across the continent. So these are absolutely necessary, because you cannot just jump into it, but you must match. How did AU itself start? Because before there were regional blocks. It was those regional blocks which were merged into each other, and AU became what it is today. So it is possible.
Let's look at the role of the founding fathers, because we know, as far as AU is concerned, a lot of struggle had taken place, and this takes us to the speech of today's, the chairman, the current chairman of Africa Union, who is Cyril Ramaphosa, who is also president of South Africa. Earlier on today, he talked about the role of the founding fathers of the AU, and he commended them. He made Africans to remember them. So we go with his speech to look at what he said.
From the beginning, it was dedicated to the idea that only through unity could Africa safeguard its independence and unlock its potential. Today, we pay tribute to our forebears, the founders of the OAU, whose dream of greater African integration and unity has endured. We also honor the legions of revolutionary leaders of Africa who took up the mantle of Pan-Africanism, and who fought for the economic and political integration of our continent, Africa. They have left a formidable legacy for our continent and all its peoples. They continue to inspire us and the generations that will come after us. It was the mission of the founders of the OAU to liberate the continent from the clutches of colonial oppression, to restore Africa's fortunes, and to restore the dignity of every African man, woman, and child. We are reminded of the difficulties they had to overcome and the resistance they encountered from foreign powers that had much to gain from exploiting divisions on the continent. Yet they taught us the power of perseverance and sacrifice, of dedication to an ideal, and that an Africa united can overcome even the greatest of challenges.
That was the Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the chairman of the Africa Union, marking his speech for the African Liberation Day 57th, anniversary. And the point is clear there. The formation of Africa Union came from as a result of wave of colonial reality, oppression by foreign powers, and eventually what was called the neo-colonialism. So, Honorable Sidia, you can see now he is making it clear in his speech that the African leaders at that time resisted all odds. So, could we digest part of what these odds were?
The odds were many, because the first odd was to liberate oneself from colonial oppression. That was first odd. The second odd was for this great effort to be made for people to understand the need for us to come together in order to become stronger. These were all. And then the third odd was there were already organizations at regional levels which are operating in different directions. There was necessity for those organizations to understand the need to come together, to dissolve themselves and come together to form a larger organization, which is the Continental Organization, which was founded in 1963. So these are the great odds that we had to fight. And then, of course, the resistance he's talking about. The West, the ex-colonial masters would not want to see a united Africa, because that would be to their detriment. They wanted Africa to continue to be divided among the ex-colonial masters, so that they would do the exploitation would become easier for them. So these were the great odds that they had to fight, and it was very difficult. They were not able to overcome all the difficulties, and it is for us now to continue to fight and overcome those difficulties in order to make real the unity of the African continent.
And he made it very clear also that, actually at that time, Africa was so much divided. And then looking at the people who were, some were already on the lands there, the farmlands, in America. So what was the feeling of Africans back home to think of those who were, unavoidably or forcefully taken to a foreign land and then separated with their African bloods?
Well, you mean you are here referring historically to the slave trade? Well, of course, and that is why in the struggle for continental unity, in the struggle for the liberation of the African continent, those people in the diaspora were part and parcel of the struggle. Pan-African is like Dubois, Pan-African is like Garvey, all played a key role in creating actually all the Pan-African congresses that took place in Paris, in Manchester and elsewhere. They were part and parcel of those conferences. So they contributed from the word go, they contributed towards it, Because at one time, Marcus Garvey, for example, the Back to Africa movement, they were, at the time there was this myth of all the blacks in the diaspora to come back to the continent. You know, that's ideal,
Yeah.
but it's not realistic. But eventually, that's how we had the Black Star. The Black Star of Ghana must have taken its name from that. The ship that is to bring them back to Africa was supposed to be called the Black Star Line. And eventually that became a name in Ghana.
And then looking at also these challenges, and then with the speech of the chairman of the African Union, in the current chair, just made a speech, and you know, commending, reminding people of the risk that the leaders, those who came together to form what is today called African Union, they endured. So I mean, is this what sort of a reminder is this? What is he trying to achieve?
No, we cannot commend them enough. We cannot salute them enough because of the sacrifice. Some of them lost their lives in the process. Lumumba was killed in the process. Ruben Umunyebe was killed in the process, and many others. Even Bembela, all of those people, Frantz Fanon, all those people were part and parcel of the same struggle, which was aimed to bring about continental unity. Can you imagine Frantz Fanon, a black man from Martinique, sacrificing his life, who was a medical doctor in Algeria, and he realized that the Algerians who were supposed to be treating as psychiatric patients, he realized that they were not psychiatrically sick, but they were sick because of what was happening to them in their on their country of birth. And eventually he resigned and became part of that struggle, and it was there that he died. In the struggle, he in fact became the mouthpiece of the national liberation of Algeria. What exactly we need to do is to decolonize our curricula. Because the curricula we inherited at independence was not meant for us. It was meant to turn us into tools in the service of colonial administration. Now that we are no longer in that situation, we have now become independent and sovereign. It means we have to decolonize that curricula to have a curricula which is going to serve the fundamental needs and aspirations of our people. This is what it is referring to. Even people like them in the United States and Britain, they want to have a feel of being African. Not only because they are black, but because of the way they think, the way they live. You know, and that they can only be inspired with that from the continent. And in other words, this continent must serve as a source of inspiration for those who are outside the continent to embrace the general move towards being sovereign and independent continent.
Yeah, you can see the nostalgia in them.
Yeah.
Saying, okay, Africa, this is our homeland, our mama land. So, I mean, so does this also communicate a bigger responsibility, or does it also put pressure on the leadership of the continent to understand that Africa needs to achieve its goals now rather than later?
Absolutely, it is. Well, we have to gradually. You know, we cannot achieve the goals at once, but we must be achieving the goals as we go along towards the ultimate objective. And in doing that, that's what I was talking about. There is a need, education, they all emphasize the need for education, because that is the fundamental tool. Without education, the liberation would not have been possible. So education is a fundamental tool for liberation, also a fundamental for development. Because you cannot develop without ideas, without skills. And it's only education that can offer that. But it means that we have to look at, even at the level of the Gambia, we have to look at the curricula again and see whether it serves our needs or not. For example, if you look at the examination results in this country, the language is always a disaster. But why do we have to bother so much about English? We have now become sovereign. We have languages which are capable of doing exactly what English is doing. Why are we not doing that? I'm happy that even though it is done in a hesitant way, not a very serious way, there is now the idea of teaching national languages in schools, but it is not being done, it is not being addressed seriously. But that eventually will have to be, because the new constitution, when it becomes a constitution in this country, is saying that you can even use your languages in the National Assembly. which means that it's not only those who can now speak English who can become members with NASA. The logical conclusion, that's what I'm telling you. That anybody who can read and write in your own language, you can become a member of the National Assembly, since it is going to be a language in the National Assembly. So these are big tasks that we have to address.
How will the AU respond to the concerns?
The concerns that they are raising, we don't have anybody to blame but ourselves. We can't blame colonialists for having a bad education system, because we are in control. It is up to us now to look at our system and see what is good and what is not good. And we should not, I think we should end this blame game. We must assume responsibility, because we decided to become independent. We must assume responsibility for that. And we know that nothing can work without education. So it is up to us to look at our system, look at what is being taught in our schools, and see what is necessary to change. And this must be across the continent. Since there is Pan-African Parliament, we have an education committee there. We have an education committees in all the regional parliaments. It is up to them to come together and look at. This is an absolute necessity, and I have been suggesting this, to look at the system, our education system, and see what is wrong with it. Why is it not serving our purpose?
I'm afraid we have to leave it.